Please be seated. On one of the frequent trips to my cousin's house in the mid-1980s to the late 1980s, I can't remember what year it was, but with sleeves rolled up, with sweat on our brows, we moved deliberately and slowly, as if a life was on the line, which of course it was. You see, that was the point of the game Operation, a battery-operated game of physical skill that tests players' eye-hand coordination and fine motor skills with which we are engrossed. If you've never played the game, it consists of an operating table, which is basically a comic likeness of a patient named Cavity Sam, who has a large red light bulb for a nose. On the surface, there are several openings labeled with the names of fictional and humorous ailments that contain plastic pieces. The general gameplay requires players to remove these plastic objects with a pair of tweezers without touching the edge of the cavity opening. The edge is, of course, electrified, and when the metal forceps, aka tweezers, come in contact with the metal edge, the loop is closed, and Sam's nose lights up, and there's a buzzer sound that radiates. While the electric current present in the loop carries insignificant voltage to shock you, when the buzzer goes off, you feel a definite jolt of disappointment, of failure, staring you right in the face. Since we never owned the game, it was always an object of constant fascination whenever I visited my cousin's house. And while it never motivated me to consider becoming a surgeon, it did lend a purpose to those countless visits as parents talked for hours upstairs. I sometimes wonder if purpose and the empowerment created through its pursuit of its aim isn't one of the most healing aspects of human life. Of course, purpose is the foundational way that we tell stories. It's always at the core plot of any movie or book, podcast, or TV series. The lead character has a desire to achieve something, and the narrative that follows shows the adversity they face as they either achieve or fail at their quest. There's nothing more inhumane than a human stripped of their ability to set a purpose in life. To lose one's purpose in life, I think, is to lose one's ability to live. Sure, we can survive without a purpose, but we can never truly live. Certainly not discover the abundant life talked about in today's collect. In the first reading from the Hebrew Bible, we are dropped into one such reality, a hopeless, purposeless, aimless moment. The prophet Isaiah is speaking to a tired and weary people who've had some serious trouble imagining a new future. Their situation is perhaps even more dire than their lack of imagination. Moving back to a destroyed capital and society after 70 years of exile and foreign domination. Part of Isaiah's creative work was to spark their imagination to attempt to do the seemingly impossible and exhausting work of starting over again and rebuilding. He knew the people couldn't possibly muster enough attention by themselves, and likely wanted to give up altogether. He shows that he understands their feeling of futility by first starting with this. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown. Scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth when he blows upon them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. Before uttering a single word of hope, he demonstrates that he sees them exactly where they are. The first step of regaining purpose in life is to acknowledge where we are, knowing who we are and where we are, and accepting it as a begin point. Isaiah knows that people are exhausted and not sure that they can really rediscover their purpose. And so he reminds them of who they really are. A people called into relationship with the Creator itself, who is an endless source of purpose that does not grow faint or weary. Weariness, of course, is not unique to those ancient Israelites. We're in the same boat. Moving forward beyond our current worries to work to joyfully create a new future that we can't yet imagine requires more strength than we can muster. Simply put, it's beyond what we humans hold within ourselves. And so Isaiah shares some inspirational and loving words. Those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up like with wings like eagles, and they shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. I don't know about you, but hearing these words sends a jolt through my body. And they're more startling than that buzzing sound from the game of Operation. Here's a promise that tickles our ears, and yet it's so easy to doubt, to, in fact, cynically and silently oppose it, to say to ourselves, surely that's a promise for somebody else, not for me. Yeah, I see others getting ahead on my social media feed, or on the coasts where there's more opportunity and more money. No, this promise isn't for me. In fact, I'm probably not even worth it. I'm overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. There's simply too many tasks demanding my attention, too many people wanting something from me. How can we believe in such a promise when we don't even have enough time or space to care for ourselves? And so we attempt to escape from the demands upon us with even more distractions. Some resort to food or drink to fill the emptiness inside. Or perhaps we flee to the dopamine-laden land of story, finding purpose in someone else's narrative, flipping through the pages of a romance novel, or engrossing ourselves in some dystopian series on some streaming platform. Or maybe we just hide out in bed feeling sick and fevered by the weight of it all. How are we to wait for the Lord when our bills are coming due and our banks don't have sufficient funds? How are we to wait for the Lord when we watch the daily brutality of war in the Holy Land or Ukraine, or even conflicts boiling up on our streets in our cities? How are we to wait for the Lord when the effects of climate change seem irreversible and it all seems so hopeless? How are we to wait for the Lord when it feels like we've fallen out of love with our spouse, or perhaps our children won't speak to us, or we're facing some grave health concern, we're too worried to even go to the doctor to get treated? It's in the midst of such global conflict and tumult and overwhelming personal anxiety that this simple, intimate story in Mark's gospel really hits home. I mean, literally, that's what the story is all about. It begins with Jesus and his disciples leaving a very public space like the synagogue, and they enter the private house of Simon and Andrew. And in this small dwelling, Jesus discovers that all is not well. He shows that healing is not something that's just for public feats of wonder and power. No, healing's available for everyone, including Simon's mother-in-law, who's in bed with a fever. He goes to her and sees her in her vulnerability. Without any fanfare, he just lifts her up by the hand, and she's healed. That's simple, made whole. There's no hocus pocus, no mumbo jumbo, no spitting in mud and smearing on someone's eyes, no self-empowerment seminar. In fact, Jesus doesn't fix her at all. He sees her, acknowledges her, and lifts her up. That's it. That's the healing. The text says, and the fever left her, and she began to serve them. And here is where modern listeners get a little bit upset. Seriously? We say to ourselves. Why is the healed woman's first response to get up and serve Jesus and his 4 disciples? Darcy, I see you can resonate with that. When we learned that the word serve translates the word diakoneo, most likely indicating food service, and means that she waited on them, hand and foot, it doesn't help any, does it? Why didn't Simon say to his mother-in-law, "Take it easy. I'll make the sandwiches this time"? And while I think that we must always pay attention to disparities, especially gendered and otherwise, I wonder if too much attention can cause us to lose focus of what's going on here. Let's zoom in a bit and sharpen our focus. While the word, that verb, diakoneo, does basically mean service, being a waiter, it's important to note the same word is used a few verses earlier when Jesus is out in the wilderness. And the text says, the angels waited on him, using the same verb. It's also a word that's grown into a whole order of the defined ministry in the church, deacons. Those who wait upon God and find their purpose through service. It just goes to show that true ministry is really just acting like a woman. And I think what we have coming up on Saturday magnifies the work that we all have to do, that all of us are called to serve. There's real purpose in Simon's mother-in-law's decision to get up and get to work. She discovers deep dignity and meaning through her ability to offer hospitality. There's nothing more precious in the Middle East than to have the ability to offer hospitality. It's a gift to be able to serve. Of course, that's still true today. When we serve, we discover more meaning, more purpose, more value than when we are served. I think our consumer-oriented culture hides the fact. And I think it may be a significant contributing factor to our collective anxiety, our definite unhappiness, and our general listlessness. We've forgotten our purpose, so busy being the consumer and making sure we get our value. 25% for a tip? Well, they better be on the spot and know my name and understand everything about me, making sure that they're asking about my children and all the rest. And as such, we create unwieldy expectations that, of course, lead us to unhappiness. What if we flipped the paradigm? Purpose makes life worth living and helps us to discover precisely what we have to give. And don't worry about all those failed operations when the buzzer went off because your hand slipped. Today's intimate story shows us that God is willing to find each and every one of us, whether we're hiding under the covers in our beds or not, to find us and present us with a special invitation to join God in co-creating a world of purpose, a world of transformation. God provides the healing that releases us from what holds us back. And yet, we don't seem to feel worthy of it, of that healing or that freedom. So instead, we choose to dwell in a prison of shame and dis-ease. We imagine that our frailty and our limits are what defines us. But God is waiting on us. God is serving us, coming to whisper into our ear that you're called to something great, that you yourself are something great. Today I have to invite you to do the same, not what you're freed from, but what you are freed for. If we start with the for, then maybe we can accept the wholeness and the freedom that God is offering us. It's not something that we earn by our own merit, but something that's freely given. But sometimes we need to realize what we're freed for before we can accept it. So, my friends, listen closely to your lives and let them speak. What is it that calls to you, is calling to you? Listen closely. What or who needs you this week? You're not only freed from, you are freed for. Each time you respond to the needs of people around you, you're in fact responding to the God's call and living into the freedom that is ours in Christ. You are no doubt already serving Christ's call, but perhaps it's time to further claim or deepen your calling. Perhaps today is the day you will choose to embrace more of God's healing in your life, more acceptance of yourself. Maybe you'll get a glimmer of the greatness that's inside you, and then live into it. Sometimes it's only when we're freed for that we have the ability to be freed from. If you want to grow in grace, listen closely for that for that you're willing to engage with. And remember that often it's only in community that we can hear and participate in a greater call to action and a more meaningful life. You may have heard that famous quote from the preacher Frederick Buechner, but it bears repeating. The place that God calls you is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. That's the place to which God is calling each of us. Perhaps it's time that you hear God's call on your life again, or perhaps for the first time, or perhaps really and truly decide to go all in. It's time to experience your deep gladness, the fullness that emerges when you know that God is working in and through you, the fullness that comes when your life has a purpose that gives great joy not only to you, but to God and the angels that wait on him in heaven. Today, claim God's healing and find your calling. Amen.